Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Good morning and welcome back to the lecture series on partition of India in print media and cinema. Today we are going to talk about the second and third generation immigrants in the diaspora. So we have to understand what comprises the different generations first. The first generation, when we talk about the first generation migrants, we are talking about the adults at the time of partition, the ones that either moved as single men and women with their natal families, their extended families, or in the case of the women that were recently married, they moved with their new families. By second generation, we refer to a populace that were either born before or after partition, after their parents came as refugees or immigrants to India. So, they were either children at the time of partition, somewhere below the age of 15, or they were born in independent India. And these children had a wide range of experiences while their parents were struggling to establish themselves in the host land. And the third generation refers to those that were born to the children of the first generation refugees. So, the first generation are their grandparents, right. These three generations also have very different understandings of partition. The time period that has elapsed becomes very important, and so the family narratives, the story of the original home on the other side of the border become diluted with the progression of time. The narratives are disjointed, and the way of looking at the watershed of partition becomes very different for the different generations, and there are certain gaps which cannot be overcome. So, memories are never straightforward and simplistic remembrances, but they are interspersed with forgetting too. Individuals do not want to remember, and sometimes family do not want to recall or even tell the next generation about the bad times. So, how much is remembered and then how much is passed on to the next generation is something very interesting to note, or is something that one might want to study, and people often avoid the stigma of being the refugee, right, which is also why the narratives become trimmed. The narratives can either be trimmed or blow out of proportion and acquire a grandeur or acquire a grand scale depending on what it is about. If it is a story of a journey of progress and ultimately success and ultimate success, then it is actually told with a lot of pomp and elan within the family. If it is a story of failure of destiny and a life of destitute, then it is not likely to be narrated or to be circulated too much within the family. So a lot of those stories get sidelined to the point of being forgotten, right. The nation also has an amnesia. Nation wants to focus on the newly established independent nation, in the newly established notion of a free country, of an independent nationhood, and it wants to build on that rather than harping too much on the backlogs, on the setbacks of partition. The personal fragmented narratives have given each of the three generations distinct and yet overlapping views of partition around the dominant issues. So, the dominant issues are comprise the rhetoric of success, the temporary nature of and even the anomalous nature of the cataclysm, and then the pleasure of narrating about the shared culture, how the people struggled together, the refugees struggled together shoulder to shoulder, and they overcame, and how they came over the crisis. So, the second and third generations relate to the success of their families in two ways. On the one hand, they project back to the notion of pre-partition success, and on the other they want to look forward, they want to embrace their family duties and their own versions of a hard work ethic. So, this is mainly in relation to the Punjabi refugees I am talking about. So, the second and especially third generation emphasize the effect of partition on their families, and they recount they therefore inherit those narratives of wealth and status that were once there, and then they were lost when the family became refugees. And so, they have this imagination of the pre-partition lifestyle of their forefathers, which they want to regain, which they want to achieve again in the new land. So, the discussion of the sizable Haveli and the large joint families with many servants and the amenities enjoyed and the status enjoyed by the family are part of family legacies, family lores, right. Second generations focus on maintaining their middle class identity, and they had the knowledge that their family was not only, many of them actually boast of the fact that their families not only possessed wealth, but also a commensurate status which needs to be brought back, which needs to be regained. So, emphasis is among the refugees, there is a great emphasis on education as a means or the social capital as a means of, I am sorry, the social and cultural capital as a means of gaining wealth, gaining economic capital. And so, they attest to their the third and second generations attest to their potential, their capability of maintaining their family's reputation through not only and maintaining the family's reputation, something that the family had achieved once by dint of their hard work and the patriarch's sacrifice, most of the times the sacrifice of the refugee generation. The second and the third generations want to maintain the family's reputation that was originally earned by dint of hard work and sacrifice of the first generation refugees. So, this success of the subsequent generations of refugees is a combination of understanding the knowledge of what the family had previously, the pre-partition lifestyle, and then the inspiration and the determination to work hard, as well as the family pressure that makes the subsequent generations work hard in order to achieve gain back the past reputation, past status, and achieve material success and stability. So, the third generation's vision of past wealth is a direct product of how the first generation narrates the past. So, the third generation learns about the entire journey after partition through the direct witnesses, the ones that had been there, that had lived through all of it. The hard working Punjabi refugee is not only a general, not only a trope, but it has become a larger stereotype that in a way is forced by the older generations, and for in some cases the younger generations actually espouse and strive to match up with that stereotype, live up to that stereotype. The figure of the hardworking refugee, which is acknowledged both in films and in the common social lore, common way of saying. Third generation refugees actually grew up with the memories, like I was saying, that has been inherited from the two generations that preceded, the memories that are partly in large ways idealized, part of which has components of imagination in it, and also some of it being extremely negative, and those negative aspects of memory are not much talked about, or talked about with a lot of pain. People want to discuss them too much. So, this process of passing on, bequeathing and inheriting memories, they are likely to distort an individual's understanding of the past, of history, unless a well-rounded, divergent understanding is shaped, different views are incorporated and they are presented, they are available in parallel. So, all the versions are available. So, child is able to understand that if this was true, there was also a counter to this reality, and so that is how the notions developed about the past are not lopsided. Anjali Guerra says that partition in the West as in partition in the East was not uniform experience shared by all those who crossed the border from the West, but varied according to gender, class, caste, ethnicity, region, education, profession, mode of transport and place of settlement. So, Guerra analyzes the ways in which partition altered notions of one's, how partition altered one's notions of home, belonging and community. It is very interesting that memories cannot be objective. So, they are subjective in the first place, and they are subjectively transmitted, and that is how they are retained as a displaced meaning from the original, and that is how partition lingers, partition stays back and comes back with newer significance in the post-partition decades. With every new generation, newer meanings come up. These meanings actually happen as a result of, these meanings are formed as a result of one's knowledge inherited from the family, which further interacts with the contemporaneous realities. Right. So, for the Punjabi refugees in Delhi, the convergence between the social arenas of the family and the nation reveals the corresponding characteristics of strategic ignorance. So, there were many cases in refugee families where family members wanted or needed to forget or produce ignorance. Ignorance on the state level is not something similar to ignorance on the family level. So, there are two aspects. On the one hand, the Indian state was also refraining from talking too much about the bloody aspects of partition, and then the families had their disgraceful experiences that were being hushed up. So, these silences at different levels were also, there existed gaps and disjunctures within silences being enforced at different levels. These disjunctures expose, as Arjun Appadurai states, the set of norms whose sole purpose is to regulate the inherent debatability of the past in the present. So, how the family as a unit or an individual personally muddies the past, or let us say evades some parts, some aspects of the past, and how such evasion, such deletion happens at the state level may not follow the same processes but and it's very interesting to note how these two practices, or these two practices have some overlaps and then some differences, right. So inherited memories seek to fill by talking to children and grandchildren of partition refugees and understanding how memory is passed down, so what is retained or lost and how it is owned and shared by subsequent generations, right. Firdaus Azim states that these are the memories of third generation descendants of migrants or refugees who have no direct experience of life before the 1947 partition. So, they have never been to the other side of the border to their original homes. The story they weave is complex with many strands where differences pertain not only to religion, but also to ethnicity and language. So, partition narratives in refugee families illuminate two unresolved modalities. There is a tension between ignorance and forgetting. One part is how especially the older generations want to forget some parts of the memory, and then the other part of the debate is how the subsequent generations do not have enough material to forget. They are basically ignorant. They do not remember, they do not even remember to be able to disremember, or they do not even learn about the past to be able to unlearn them, to be able to unlearn it. So, forgetting is the power of erasure, obliterating and revising memories. Ignorance is the power of unawareness. In fact, ignorance is indeed a power, because the baggage of a memory, if it does not shape one in a favorable and in a desirable way, can be cumbersome, it can be unfavorable, and it can be overpowering on one's identity, it can crush one's identity. To be ignorant about certain aspects, not knowing about certain aspects of one's past, can be potentially empowering. It contributes to a strategic space, unhampered by memory. Ignorance is not really hampered by a very overbearing and demanding remembrance from the past. So, both forgetting and ignorance are used in different ways at the level of the family and at the larger level of the state. There are some things that we do not know and some things that we do not want to remember. The familial silence around the shared links between Hindus, Sikhs and Muslims, for example, have been translated into a structural ignorance. So, when we have the stories about the enemies and friends, that is how they are defined. Even the first generation refugees sometimes play ignorant because they want to forget about the shared past. After all that they have witnessed, many of them have lost their faith in intercommunal harmony, and even the possibility that the different communities could live together, had lived together in fact with some degree of dignity. So, it is a kind of generational forgetting that is imposed and passed on and naturalized, and that is how we understand the enemy and the friend. So, in fact, seen from India's point of view, Indians' point of view, the creation of Pakistan is popularly understood as the political result of yielding to the Muslims' interests, right. And so, partition is read as a loss of the unity, the territorial unity, and the imagination of a unified nation, right. For the second generation Bengali immigrants, interviews reveal that nostalgia is there, nostalgic pining, and yet there is a kind of emotional detachment to where the idea of or the imagination of the homeland never seen, is to a large extent sublimated and diluted. The dialects, the different dialects from East Bengal are hardly and in fact never used, at least by the urban youths from the immigrant families, and these families located in the urban areas in Calcutta are not sticklers of East Bengali customs and traditions. The lives have become more hybridized, and the roots for the third generation, you know, and the identification is with Calcutta or Kolkata. Their social setting has transformed into, you know, cultural sites. So, in other words, their cultural sites that the first generation actually carried inside their mind, inside themselves, in their memories, have diluted. The cultural sites are imagined in the immediate locality where they live, the immediate social setting where they inhabit. So, younger members from immigrant families, we see they grew up in housings. Many of these were colony housings. In other cases too, the refugee houses would be modeled after the original home back in East Bengal and Pakistan, East Pakistan. So, for the third generations, interestingly, in the absence of the real referent, the real home that they have never seen and probably would never see, they understand East Bengaliness, East Bengali lifestyle through a simulated existence in Calcutta or in other parts of India where they are born and brought up. So, that is how you know, the cultural site which they you know, their earlier generation carried inside their head when they you know, when they moved from East Bengal, from East Pakistan, has been transcribed, has been transposed to the immediate social setting where the third generation is living now. So, that is their home. I mean, that is what they understand. The East Bengaliness that they get from their immediate family now, their nuclear family, is the East Bengaliness that they know, and that is already not the original, that is already something besides the original. It is hybridized. Now, Kolkata itself has undergone a lot of changes through the post-partition decades, and the meaning of the city has shifted through its interface with new ways of life, new ways of being, new cultural practices, social practices, and even with the changed name, the city itself can be you know, seen as a palimpsest with layers of meanings, you know, written one on top of the other. For the first generation, you know, cultural sites would comprise landed property, rivers, joint family system, something that they had experienced back in their ancestral home on the other side of the border. However, for the second generation, where such you know, family systems, such extended family systems are not possible, the cultural site has shifted to the country of immigration, and so they actually extract or they derive meanings from the immediate you know, surroundings. Dipankar Sinha notes that by the turn of the millennium, the phenomenon of insider outsider, who is the insider or the native and who is the outsider or the refugee or immigrant, has actually watered down to a large extent, and there has been considerable mainstreaming of the colony population. So these differences are highly theoretical, so to say. In everyday practices, they so much as almost do not exist. They almost do not exist. Now, talking about diaspora, diasporic communities take many forms and they engage in a substantial range of activities, and yet there is a tendency among the scholars, among the socialists, and you know, even in the nationalist depictions, to understand diasporic communities as a locus for studying the transnational practices only, right. Diasporas in reality are multifaceted social organizations. They are interwoven in the contemporary context, in their immediate contexts, with legacies of colonialism, and there are many interesting emerging trends towards cultural, economic, political and social globalization. Diaspora is something in a state of flux, it is never constant. Diaspora should not be conceived only as through the traditional notion of persecuted victims who were forced to flee their homeland. However, on the other hand, the enduring image of diasporian communities remain bound not only to the nation, not only to the notion of migration, but rather to the notion of forced displacement. So, dimension of victimage is naturally ascribed with or ascribed to the diaspora, whereas diaspora actually has more to their existence than only the history of victimization. Independence and partition of India fundamentally changed how members from the Indian diaspora community in Africa identified and defined themselves through focusing on the experiences of Indians in Eastern and South Africa. So, independence first of all caused them to move away from India as a source of political identity. They started seeing themselves as a distinct community defined by their immediate and unique context, as bred by the adopted country, bred by the or the new context as posed by the host country. Secondly, the partition of India required Indians in Africa to redefine the notions of territorial belonging, because it was now a country fundamentally different from the one they had left. So, maybe the India that they had left when they ventured to travel abroad was now part of Eastern or Western Pakistan. It was not even India. So, in some cases the religious divisions worsened as a result of partition, and the intercommunal strife back in India had repercussions in the diaspora. It caused the Indians in Africa to identify themselves more strongly along religious lines. So, different circumstances come up in Kenya, in Mauritius, and in South Africa, where the Indian populations react differently to the question of independence and the British and the partitioning of the British India. So, the diaspora shared a common pan-Indian identity that was reinforced by a common subordinate relationship with the British, right. Some of these writers such as Nagendranath Ganguly see the interests of Indians at home and abroad as something parallel and identical, and so they demand support for the Indian diaspora. There is a demand for support from the Indian diaspora from the British Indian government. So, the diaspora is geographically away, and yet they are not really entirely detached from the political schemations and the political happenings back in India. They are somehow an extended part of it. They somehow echo the issues happening in India. We see that the violent clash between Hindus and Muslims that marked that happened at the time of partition affected the identity of the diaspora along religious lines. Earlier, the history of Hindu and Muslim immigrants in Africa was closely knit. So, they led a kind of syncretic existence as indentured immigrants in Africa, and they found themselves living and working side by side, often in very difficult conditions. So, according to Ganguly, it was necessary for Indians to think of themselves beyond their community, especially in their overseas experience. They thought it as important to compromise and adapt their habits or their conventional communal differences in order to be able to live in their new situations in the host land in African countries. Even intermarriages between castes that were forbidden in India would occur in diaspora. For Indians that were born abroad, differences of caste and religion had less cultural significance than the ones living in the home country. However, we see that divisions between in the light of partition, in the light of the violences happening back in the homeland, there are divisions between Hindus and Muslims in Kenya and South Africa, cropping up or becoming visible from time to time, even occurring later in the 20th century. In this regard, Chandrasekhar Bhatt notes that internal relationships in Indian communities abroad were often defined by the external conditions of their adopted countries. About the Indian immigrants in Africa prior to partition, Bhatt describes that Indian identity supersedes all other bases of identity to enter onto ethnic competition, often leading to conflict with other immigrant groups. So, among the in the diasporan community, rather than Hindu Muslim, conventionally, traditionally it has been as the Indians as a unified identity against other diasporan communities, but the repercussions happening back in the homeland would leave their traces in the diaspora too. The differences would start showing, the differences that were otherwise not there. So, I would like to conclude the lecture today by seeing that partition is central to the modern identity of the Indian subcontinent, as comparable with the Holocaust among the Jews or something that defines the modern Germans' identity. Aisha Jalal calls partition as the central historical event in 20th century South Asia, a defining moment that is neither a beginning nor an end. Partition continues to influence how the peoples and states of post-colonial South Asia envisage their past, present and future. And British scholar Yasmin Khan studies partition as a standing testament to the follies of the empire, which ruptures community evolution, distorts historical trajectories and forces violent state formation from societies that would otherwise have taken different and unknown paths. So, with this I am going to conclude today's lecture. Thank you.